Welcome to the Playlist Podcast, where we talk to artists, designers, engineers, musicians, and all kinds of people from all walks of life to uncover a little bit about them and the video games that influenced them along the way. My guest today is Lu Gigliotti, and Lu has been in the games industry for the past 30 years, and he's still going strong. He started as an artist, he's been a creative director, producer, and now executive producer. And this was a really fun chat to have. I've worked with Lu across multiple studios, and Lu is a wonderful storyteller, but the games that he talks about today, the games that he's worked on, it's a pretty incredible lineup, and hearing the stories of how he broke into the industry and then how he kind of worked through and worked on incredible titles that are beloved, but also sometimes divisive, was really fascinating. And stick around to the end, because this conversation does kind of go into what Lu feels the future of gaming will be, or where it is currently and where it's headed. And I think the one thing I really appreciate about Lu is he's incredibly insightful. And as you'll see, or as you listen or see, depending on how you're experiencing the podcast. So without further ado, this is Lu Gigliotti.
I'm Lu Gigliotti. I am a video game developer, publisher. I've been in the games industry for, over 40 years now. 30 years now. I'm not that old. And I've done a little bit of everything in the industry. I've been doing it a long time. Seen it kind of go through a lot of really important phases of the industry as it evolved over the years. But it's an industry that's always kind of keeps you on your toes if you enjoy it, right?
100%. And I'm very excited to kind of have this conversation, because I have worked with you for many years in the past. And, I think you're an incredible, not just creative person and leader, but you're an incredible storyteller and orator, and you are full of these amazing stories. And I mentioned this to you the other day, but I look at you and not in a bad way, but like the Forrest Gump of gaming, because you were there at all those moments, right? From way back in the early days, and you're there now, you're still in the game.
Yeah.
And you've just managed to find yourself at these working on titles which are kind of pivotal or can be divisive, but you're working on important shit. And I think that some of the stories around that are incredible. So very excited to do this. And maybe we start at the beginning, and I'd like to hear about Earthworm Jim.
Yeah. Well, before we go into my life, I love the Forrest Gump analogy. I guess now I'm going to start saying games are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, right?
Or you match 3 of them.
Or you match, yeah, exactly. And then, So the Earthworm Jim story is very, very short, actually. That's how I got into the industry. I met through a friend of mine who was learning to animate with the Earthworm Jim team, and a guy named Mike Dietz, who in particular, by the way, Mike Dietz single-handedly animated the entire game by himself with a pencil. Okay, so this guy's a legend. And these guys brought me in to basically just kind of clean up, do anything, basically clean up cells, whatever, right? But what was most important, since, I really didn't contribute to in any meaningful way, what the most important part about meeting the Earthworm Jim team was 2 things. One, I didn't realize at the time that I was around some of the most talented people I will ever work with in my life. I was 20 nothing. I didn't realize it at the time. I did know that these people were special. I also knew they were doing something that I didn't even know was a real job, right? What? You make video games? And And for someone like me at that time in my life when I wasn't sure what I was going to do, they provided a sense of stability, right? And they taught me a lot, right? About like what it actually takes to make a game and ship it, right? You're talking about a team of like 12 people total that made that game, right? And so like, but the real important part was that these guys, the creator of Earthworm Jim, Doug TenNapel, because of some kind of dispute he had at the time with Shiny, he got the opportunity to leave and create his own studio called the Neverhood. And that's when I really got to embed myself with this team and actually make stuff with them, right? Start making games with them. Sure, I still did QA and stuff like that, which, by the way, is a really important job. But it was at that point when I was earning enough trust where they were giving me more responsibility, design responsibility, and eventually that led to production responsibility. But I didn't realize of course the game was fantastic, but it's really the people behind it. They're people that stayed in my life for, decades after that. Right. And then, we all move around the world and get older, but I can honestly say that Ed Schofield and Mike Dietz in particular were almost like father figures to me during that time. Like they really helped me grow up, right? And focus, learn how to focus and make this a career. I'm eternally grateful to Doug TenNapel as well, the creator of Earthworm Jim and the Neverhood. To this day, I don't think I've ever worked with a more prolific creative person ever. I mean, you're the closest thing to that. Like you're prolific. You are like, you crank out quality work. It's just that this guy, I mean, he would get a wild hair up his ass that he wanted to make a graphic novel, hide in his office for 48 hours and come out with 3 graphic novels, completely illustrated, written, everything. And they'd get published. They were that good, right? So yeah, he was the first exposure I had to creative geniuses, right?
But, I think with, back in that, so when did Earthworm Jim, when was it developed? What year? Like 80?
No, you're talking 90.
Oh, okay.
Well,
not that old. Sorry, 92.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I mean, that's not only is it stylistically sharp as an IP, right? But it's, to your point, it was hand animated, it was a small team, and it really had an identity, and it's something people haven't seen before. It's Earthworm in a astronaut's costume with arms. It's a platformer and stuff, but it's not pedestrian. And did you come to that studio with a love of games? Because I know you're in a band, and I kind of know a bit about where you were at. But did you come as a gamer per se, or what even was a gamer in the early 90s? I mean,
that's a really great question. I still think that the 80s and early 90s, the games industry still felt like a cottage industry. Remember, back in those days, again, 12 to 14 creative people could get together, make a game in 9 months, spend $250,000, ship it, and it's a success. And then you make the next game, right? That. So I think the games industry hadn't become 100% hit driven in that massive sense, right, yet. So I think back then there was a lot more room, from a business point of view, a lot more room for creativity. So if you get some guy with a crazy, beautiful vision for a worm that lives inside a spacesuit that gives them, the power to do things. And the other thing you have to remember, what made Earthworm Jim very different, and I don't know if people understood it completely, even now, is that it was hand animated. So remember, the vision for that game was Mike Dietz saying, video game graphics suck. Animation sucks in video games. Remember, everything was 8-bit, 16-bit. Mm-hmm. And so, they actually, I forget what they called this, but they came up with the technique for how you take hand-drawn cell animation. I'm talking like sheets and thousands of sheets. And then figure out how to take a picture of them, create these things called BMP files. And then those files, you come up with a piece of, software that just plays them back at 32 frames per second or 48 frames or whatever you needed, right? And all of a sudden, if you could then bring controls to that, simple controls, you literally had a interactive hand-drawn 2D animation.
Yeah.
And nobody had seen anything like that in a video game before Earthworm Jim, right?
So, well, I think on consoles, because I know in arcades there was, what is the name of the game? It was Don Bluth was the animator,
Dragon's Lair.
Dragon's Lair, but that's a different thing because that was not a platformer it wasn't like a console game. And so the animation was there, but it was much more of an animated traditional thing rather than what you're talking about,
100%. So the difference was, and this is a really important difference, Dragon's Lair was an interactive video, right?
Yeah.
Video plays, you have to time it, push left, push right, up, down button. Earthworm Jim was literally hands-on full control. You're controlling this character and he's moving around. And it looked like a cartoon that you were literally controlling at that level, where Dragon's Lair was like, it's almost like a choose your own adventure canned video that based on your input, it changes the next video. This was a live video game where it felt like you were playing an animation, right? And I forget, it's called like animate something. I forget what Dave Perry, the studio head, who very smart business guy, was like, we need to they put a label. But if you talk to Mike Keats and Ed Schofield and Doug TenNapel, they'll be like, yeah, we just wanted to make hand-drawn animation in a video game. And they did it.
Yeah.
And I think that led. So it wasn't that I was like, sure, I played lots of games. Like I was, in my early 20s, but I was always like into something creative, right? Like whether that was music, being in a band, or video games, drawing. I love to draw. As a matter of fact, the funniest thing about it was because my roommate and best friend was learning to animate. He was basically Mike's what do you call that? Like student almost, or like his
protege.
Protege, thank you.
Yes.
And I could draw. Like I remember I drew something for Mike Deason, showed it to him, and I remember he looked at it and goes, "Wait a second, you could draw." And I was like, I always thought I could. But then they gave me the bouncing ball test, the basic anime, and I just failed it miserably.
Yeah.
And Mike looked at me and said, "Yeah, you're not an animator, right?" And so, but for whatever reason, they just kept me around, right? They were like, "We'll find something here for you to do," right? And like I said, it wasn't until we left. This would have been 90. I don't know, 4. It's so long ago now. And their love of animation made them want to do something completely different in the world of animation, right? And so like, it wasn't until then that, so I used to design furniture as a kid in my teens, and that's what clicked. Somebody at work, I don't remember who, was like, "Wait a second, you used to design furniture. So you understand like logic, right? If this, then that, right?" And I loved Bauhaus, like form follows function, right? So think about functionality first and then how you're going to make it beautiful. And that's when it clicked. And I don't remember who. They were like, "Well, you have design sensibilities, so why don't we throw some level design ideas at you," right? And that's when I really started to kind of understand how I could be a game developer, right? And
yeah.
Oddly enough, I still had to figure out how to become a game designer while making a game out of 4,000 pounds of clay.
So I think you probably need to give a bit of a description of the Neverhood, because there is absolutely a through line from Earthworm Jim, inventing that bitmap kind of sprite system, to the Neverhood. It's the same mentality, but it's like here to fucking here. Like it's a crazy leap. So please give a description of the Neverhood.
Man, the Neverhood, I was just talking to somebody today from this person I work with from Ukraine, and somehow the topic got brought up, and I raised my hand. I said, "I worked on that." And everybody in the room was like, "What?" And this specific person grew up with it because in places like Ukraine and other parts of Eastern Europe and even Russia, it was the only video game that got smuggled into the country because it was bundled with Windows. 95.
Oh, right.
So when games were illegal, this game showed up. Anyways, it's created a cult following around it. And simply put, the Neverhood was a game idea that Doug TenNapel had, where, okay, they figured out how to do 2D animation video games. So that they needed a new challenge. And the new challenge was, I wonder if we can make a game made literally out of clay and using stop motion animation, right? Like Aardman Studios kind of stuff. And that's the thing I really loved about Doug and the team there was, again, I didn't realize this at the time. I thought this was normal, right? But like they were, not only were they some of the most creative people, these were hard creative problems we had to solve. I'll never forget, like Doug had his meeting with DreamWorks, came back, and he said, we're going to make this game called the Neverhood out of clay. And I remember, they kind of brought me in and kind of showed me the warehouse. And it was a like 50,000 square foot empty warehouse attached to an office. And he goes, this is where we're going to make this game out of clay. And I said, how? And he goes, I have no idea. No idea. But he managed to secure off of his success of Earthworm Jim. He's a creator of Earthworm Jim, right? And so he was able to secure a deal with DreamWorks, who, by the way, at the time thought they were going to make video games, music, television, movies. They learned very quickly after the Neverhood that video games was too hard. So they got out of the business.
Just to interject that, because I think that was also around the period where Spielberg made a couple of games, or maybe it was later. Like I know there was a Wii game that he created, but he was a massive gamer and used to, Medal of Honor was kind of him. He was involved in that, but it was a period where Spielberg was all up in games and then never went back, basically.
Yeah, well, that actually came much later than us. We're talking now about 94, 95, right? But that said, somewhere on the internet, there's a video of Steven Spielberg talking about the Neverhood.
Yeah.
And I remember he said something. He said, the reason why I think this idea is so special and why we want to be a part of it, DreamWorks, right? And by the way, Katzenberg was all for it too. Loved it, right? From an animation point of view, he thought it was great. And Spielberg says on this video, somewhere on the internet, he says, everybody has grown up playing with clay and using their hands to create their own little world. And I think he was talking about himself too. Right? And so he just loved this idea of a world that anybody could have made, because the characters were all like beautiful but simple, right? Simple shapes, simple. Even the world was all simple shapes, very colorful, and yeah. So next thing you know, we're in a warehouse in Mission Viejo, California. We ordered what turned out to be 2 tons of clay, 4,000 pounds. And in this giant 50,000 square foot warehouse, Doug decided we needed to build an entire movie set, right? And then, it was going to be a first person point and click adventure game, right? With puzzles. And the way it worked was, imagine this giant warehouse that we built out of wood, chicken wire, plaster of Paris, and clay. And what it was though, was underneath it all was a train set. We spent thousands of dollars on toy train sets and tracks. So check this out. Every 3 feet of set you could lift and remove. Right. And then you would have at the time, this is true, we had the first ever digital cameras ever. They were Minoltas, and they were a whopping 1 megapixel.
Whoa.
No one had ever heard of this, right? I didn't even know what the fuck a megapixel was, right? And I remember they were so cutting edge that they cost $10,000 a piece. Okay. So what we did was, and I think, I don't know who came up with this idea. Would have either been Doug or probably Ed. Ed was the kind of the secret genius. But basically what we did was, imagine how we did the first person walking around the world was we would duct tape this camera to a piece of the train caboose and then move it on the tracks and then take a picture, turn it 90 degrees, picture, 90 degrees, picture, 90 degree picture. And then And then we had created this train system all underneath the world that you could pull out sections of the world and move. And that's how you navigated in the game. And all we did in the game was we just, when you move from one spot to another and we would move the train, we would then add a little motion that made it look like you were walking, like this, right?
It's a really ingenious like method. Did they have, were they like King Kong, like, you know, in the 30s, King Kong was like a metal armature that they could move? Like, did the clay have armatures inside, or
100%? As a matter of fact, we found at the time, I believe he was the last known armature maker, handmade armatures in the country. Remember, this was a dying art by the 90s, right? Like stock. Like we even got a hold of one of Harryhausen's original freaking film cameras, and we shot one cutscene using a Harryhausen. We shot it on film. Okay, like just to say we did it, right?
Yeah.
But this guy, he was probably in his 80s at the time, was almost blind. Okay, and what he had was this young, I don't know, he looked like he was 18-year-old apprentice. Really strange kid. Imagine you're like 18, 19, and you decide you want to make armatures for stop motion animation. You seek out the only known guy who still makes them in his 80s. And this kid was this man's eyes. He would sit down and like, you know, he would tell him what he's looking at. And it was a ball and socket armatures, hand welded, hand manufactured. One of my jobs was to then go retrieve these from the nice old man, and then take him to another guy who would, instead of making them out of clay, because we tried putting clay around them, and you move them and the clay would break.
Yeah.
So we had to come up with another solution, and the solution was that all the puppets, right, that we would animate were actually had a foam cast put on top of the metal armature. But then it had to look like clay, and then we hand painted all of them continuously, and that so Clayman and all the other characters, at least in the Neverhood, for Skull Monkeys, this was too expensive. We just started making them at the office out of like packets of old condoms and plastic gloves and cotton, and then put them around the armatures. We used the same armatures from the Neverhood because we couldn't afford anymore. But yeah, for the Neverhood, they were a cast foam around the metal armatures that were handmade. And then at the bottom of the armature, where the feet is, on the bottom of the foot, were little areas that you could screw the character onto. So for all the cutscenes in the game, we took that giant 50,000 square foot set we created, and we created an exact 1/16 size replica of the world for all of the cutscenes that were all, those were all that. So if the game was all this giant world in first person walking around, and all the puzzles and all the cutscenes were actually shot in a contained area. And all the armatures had, so for the in-game puzzles, we used a green screen, and Mike Dietz would hand animate all the armatures and all the jumping and landing and the butt bounces and all that. But then the cutscenes were actually shot on a 1/16 size scale of the giant world by hand.
That is crazy.
Then we would shoot a scene that was, I don't know, 15,000 shots with no ability to look even one frame back. We didn't know. So you would spend an entire day, 9 hours, doing one cutscene, and then go through the process of converting it all to BMPs, and then playing it back and realize it didn't work. Someone turned a light on in the warehouse and fucked up the whole. We for that game, there was over 2 hours of stop motion animation. So that's more than a feature length film. But honestly, I think we threw away about an hour and a half.
What was the production timeline? If it was, because for example, Nightmare Before Christmas took 2 years, right? And an entire army, and they didn't even have, I mean, Jack Skellington had like preset heads, and they would just do the lip sync, right? So
yeah.
What was the production timeline for actually capturing all of the footage and all of the spy materials?
That's where I say that game was a labor of love, because we had 2 years to get it done. And you're talking a team, I think there was a total at max, were 14 people.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of effort involved in not only building the set, doing all the first person scenes, getting that all shot, having to animate all the in-game puzzle solving elements, then shoot, almost 2 hours of cutscenes for the cutscenes, not to mention, the amount of design that went into that game, like for all the puzzles, and the puzzles were insane. They were insanely hard. And then on top of it, we had this genius named Terry Taylor that did all the music, and integrating that. Remember, this is like when email was new. Okay. So like, the music assets, my ass would have to drive from Mission Viejo to Costa Mesa to Terry's friend's house, their in-house recording studio, twice a week to get new songs and new sounds, and then drive on a disc and drive it back and then figure out, what I mean? Like those days, the legwork involved to get a game like that done was, but it almost broke us, that game, everybody.
What was the response, not only from, I guess, the general public, but what did Spielberg think? Like, what was the DreamWorks response?
So they loved it, DreamWorks. As a matter of fact, I ran into Katzenberg many years later when I worked at THQ at E3 one year. And he, I walked up, hey, Mr. Katzenberg, really nice guy. And he spent half an hour in front of everybody just talking about the Neverhood with me, right? Yeah. Like he kept asking about Doug, how's Doug doing? Blah, blah. So they loved the game. The problem was, okay, remember, this is mid-90s now, right? DreamWorks had never made games. They'd never published the games. Mm-hmm. They didn't know, they came from movie, film, and animation, or in music, right? So all of a sudden they built an office in Beverly Hills. I mean, beautiful. The lamps cost $3,000. It was like movie world, right? Mm-hmm. But they didn't know how to publish. So by the time we shipped the game, see, people don't realize, but the game was actually bundled. They did a bundle deal, I think, with Windows 95. I don't know.
95 would make sense. Yeah,
I think that's what it was. Anyways, they only pressed. It's on disc, right? It's one of the first disc games, by the way, and they only pressed 500,000 copies total. And like the majority of those were actually just bundled with a Microsoft Office update. So I think what happened was when it was time to release the game, DreamWorks, just didn't know how to publish and distribute video games. So that's why I say the game is become kind of a cult classic, because within 2 weeks, all the copies were either sold or gone in these bundles.
Yeah.
And then DreamWorks said the video games were out. Right. So the more were never pressed. Right. So if you have a copy of the game, which I do, like there's people out there that have offered me $2,000 for my copy.
Crazy.
The Neverhood, because it's just impossible to find. Right.
And so did DreamWorks own the IP? Was that the deal? Or did Doug retain ownership of the IP?
No, that was the thing, was that Doug, because he was a creator of Earthworm Jim, had a lot of clout, creatively. So he definitely owned it. Right.
Yeah.
Now the problem though was that we then had to find a publisher for our next game, and that's when we met EA, and EA actually published Skull Monkeys, our second game. But I think what happened was, part of signing that deal was, EA was very savvy. They wanted to own, and I think now EA, to this day, I think they still own the Neverhood, Skull Monkey, like anything we did at that studio, I think is wholly owned and put into what everybody likes to affectionately call the vault, right?
The vaults. Very familiar with the vaults. Yeah.
Yeah. The vault. By the way, we tried years later in 2014 to buy it back from EA, because we did this thing called Armacrog, which was like just myself, Mike Dietz, and Ed Schofield, and like 2 other people. Doug contributed to it, but we tried to do another stuff, just as a spiritual successor to the Neverhood. And we actually tried to buy it back. We did a GoFundMe and raised almost $3 million. Like,
yeah.
But EA they have a policy. They do not sell. Nothing leaves the vault.
I tried to help American McGee with Alice getting it out of the vault, and very passionately, and I calls on them and emails and talks with EA BizDev while I was there, but yeah, that vault is sealed shut. Like, they do not open the vault. I mean, there's certain things they open the vault for, but it has to be of strategic value to them. So if it's like an older IP that they don't see the value in, or they, for whatever reason, yeah. I mean, I guess I understand why they do that from like, one day if they sell, they've got this like, vault of precious IPs that can be mined. But it's heartbreaking, because in the Alice case,
Yeah.
when American McGee's Alice was in development, someone at EA sold the film rights before the game was out to Dimension, which was part of Miramax.
Yeah.
And then for years, American tried to get a TV series kind of done and all this stuff and developed and got talent attached to studios. And I think he worked in it initially at Dimension, but then like the rights just kept getting sold without him, and he would try and chase it and get more expensive. And then the game rights are another thing. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going off into a tangent, but yeah, it's probably more, I think EA probably have IPs that people don't realize,
God. Yeah.
up the way.
Maybe hundreds, if not more. And
Yeah.
I used to call the vault Event Horizon, right? Once you go in there, that's it. And there's nothing comes out, right? And
Yeah.
so anyways, yeah, because immediately after the Neverhood ships, very limited amount of copies, only 500,000 created, period. And because most of those were bundled in Windows update, not many people got exposed to it. But the people that did recognize it as like one of like the craziest ideas for a video game ever. And I get people go, "Oh, you made a game out of clay. Was it like Clay Fighter?" I'm like, dude, Clay Fighter, no disrespect, but like that had nothing on this, right? Like creatively, from an execution standpoint. But yeah, immediately we had to find a new publisher, and EA published our second game. And then they were like, "Cool, thanks, but no thanks." And then for the third game, which no one's ever heard of, called Boombots, it was terrible. We were done, right? Like, yeah, I don't even know who. But yeah, I got those years though, working with that crew of people. I guess it would have been the first, 5 years of my career. I had no idea at the time that I was working with some of the best, smartest, most creative people I will ever work with, who also taught me what I would call like my core values as a developer, right? Like, never compromise on a vision that's right. Like, you don't cut corners, like, and by the way, I took that all the way with me to like my Rockstar years, and like, it was easy to kind of go to these places where quality was paramount, right? Mm-hmm. Because of what these guys kind of instilled in us. I got funny stories about getting yelled at for not putting enough fingerprints on the side of a mountain that no one was ever going to see in the game. But Doug was like 4 a.m. yelling at me, like, "What's wrong with you? No shortcuts," that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I spent 4:30 a.m. me doing this with my hands on the side of a mountain I had just made out of clay, right? Like,
I think that's a very Aardman thing as well. Like, I know they're very insistent. Like, there's no Aardman, like the body of Wallace and Gromit is all silicon. And they kind of put the fake, the impressions in it. I think some of the head is clay, but it's all about like, make sure you mess it up. Like, it has to look organic. Otherwise it's,
People don't realize what makes stop motion special is that you actually see where the hands have been, I call it. Right. And even like the mouth. So like, how you do the mouth is you just have, what was that stuff called that you like oh man, I forget what it is. It's like a clay that then you put it in like an oven and it hardens.
Like modeling clay.
It's like a modern clay. Yeah, that's what we use for all the mouth, like expressions. And if you see Clayman, talking or going or yelling or whatever, that's all these little, and we just had little thumbtack needles. So you can, just that alone of animating that, all the mouth, this is you can see it. You can see that hands were here. You don't see the hands, but you feel that this has been handmade. And I think that's what has resonated with people. To this day, I have people, even literally today on a work call, where someone said, "I can't believe you worked on that. Like, my friends and I get together once a year and we play the game and have like a Neverhood weekend where we just talk about who could have come up with this crazy game, right? And
I think it also landed at a time, like, I think MTV did a really good job of popularizing stop motion.
yes,
Like during the late 80s and even like all up to the mid 90s before CG started creeping in, because they would do those interstitials, right? And they had Celebrity Deathmatch, and Henry Selick did a bunch of those interstitials. And, you know, it was like a space of like claymation was edgy and cool because the people using claymation were doing cool shit with it, like the Neverhood and like, you know, Henry Selick kind of doing stuff in the music videos. So it was definitely kind of a golden age where claymation was punk rock. And that was really cool. And I don't think it is ever come back to that. I mean, Tim Burton, you know, definitely, but Tim Burton is not really a stop motion now. Yeah, I mean, he's not a stop. He kind of is a stop motion guy, but he's not a stop like Henry Selick. You know, I was a big fan of Gumby growing up, and I showed my kids some Gumby episodes. I'm like, Gumby, and when you watch Gumby now, like that stuff is insane. Not the technique, but the themes of it. It's like some crazy Eastern European like fever dream. I can't explain.
Yeah, but that's about to say they are literal fever dreams. Like, every episode's like, what the fuck is going on, right?
Yeah.
But all of that motion allows you to do, like, some of the stuff in the Neverhood, like, and Skull Monkeys, by the way, which, by the way, we did all the cutscenes for that in stop motion. The craziest shit, like, you know, this idea of like, these monkeys with skulls on their heads that you land on a planet called Idzdak, and it's inhabited by intelligent monkeys with skulls on their heads, and they're trying to create a giant machine to go to the Neverhood and eat it. Like, Big Robot Bill, you fight this giant robot in the Neverhood, you know, that has a teddy bear, and that's what makes him, gives him a sense of security. Like, stop motion allows you to think in fever dream ideas, right?
Yeah.
Because it's weird. It's just is, right? But the Neverhood was great. That whole experience at the studios called the Neverhood, was great. And then I really got to go straight from creative IP from the ground up to, working on movie license deals, and like, holy crap, that was like whiplash, like we had to make the 2 worst Bond games ever after that. The World's Not Enough and Tomorrow Never Dies. In our defense, they would sign the deal, and we would always, the company I was at would always get the contracts because they would claim we could make it in 9 months, and we did from start to finish. And
that's crazy. Yeah. But were they platform exclusives? Were they like on which platforms did they come out on?
PS1 they would have been, right? And that's back in the day when, like, if you just got any game out that came out with the movie, you would sell 3 million, 4 million copies. Yeah. And at the time that the place I was working at, they'll remain nameless, that was their MO. Like, we will outbid any other development studio. We all worked, 16-hour days, like 7 days a week. I practically lived there, and we could crank out a game and release it with the movie in 9 months or whatever.
I'm going to change the direction slightly. I want to know about Capcom, and I want to know about Devil May Cry. Yeah, I want to say, what number was it?
It was DMC. So at this point,
was it the reboot again? Please explain.
Yeah. So fast forward, I guess it would have been. So I went to THQ, and I got to work with amazing people there. But I got to work with Joe Mad and Darksiders, guys like just amazing humans. After all that, and I can't remember how, but basically, oh, that's right, because I had a designer who I worked with the first time I lived in Australia when we were at THQ Australia at the time, who ended up going to go work right at Ninja Theory, and they were looking for a creative director, right? The head of the studio was at the time kind of the acting creative director, but he was 100% focused on the story and mocap and like basically the cutscenes and doing all that. And they needed someone to come in and and like basically creative direct the game.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And you know, it's Capcom's beloved, one of their beloved licenses. So, you know, here comes this guy. They don't know me from a hole in the ground. You know, I'm not Japanese. You know, there's a lot of you know, like, who are you? So I kind of like had to prove myself to everybody, right? Whether that was the Capcom guys, who by the way were lovely, to me. But long story short, you know, Capcom had this vision where they were saying, hey, that we want to kind of like figure out how to stay true to the Devil May Cry like universe and what they had built, but try and figure out how to westernize it in some way, right? And make it more, you know, because you got to remember at that point, Devil May Cry is huge in Japan with very limited, but like almost like cult success status outside of Japan. And so they thought maybe we could come up with a way. So I guess their idea was, what if we used non-Japanese developer that we would then kind of make sure that they understand what's important to the Devil May Cry universe and then develop it outside with a more Western approach. So that's why they hired me, right?
Yeah.
So I show up and the first thing I notice is that they want to change Dante's hair color, right? So I'll never forget, this was my first like real introduction that this was going to be a crazy ride. Was I go, I don't understand, like, why is his hair black when it's always, and the answer I got was, you got to shake things up. We want to shake things up a bit. And I remember going, I think this is a really bad idea, right? And they were like, and you know, and this, at the time the studio head Tamim and Capcom were like, no, you know, you got to shock people. Tamim was all about like shocking people. Like, as a matter of fact, at one point, I think the co-studio head had to like, Tamim wasn't allowed to do any more journalist interviews at some point because I think at one point someone said to him, do you think the fans would be upset? He's like, fuck them. Like kind of, you know, so you know, that's when I kind of really had to step in. Like Tamim, Lou will focus on the game and the game team. He ended up going and spending a lot of time in LA doing all the cutscenes and mocap and all that. And I'm always grateful to him and the team because he needed to trust me. You know, he's a very strong creative director, and for him to put the trust in me was huge.
And you were based in Tokyo, right? You were, and I think from memory, you were the first creative director that Capcom had hired, Western creative director. Is that correct?
That I know of, yeah.
Yeah, and you were based in Tokyo.
Well, no, I had to go to Tokyo to meet Capcom, right? And like before I even got to work on the game, you know, and but I ended up being based in Cambridge, England, because that's where the game was being developed, right? So, but you know, it's like any Japanese publisher, they got to feel confident in you. Right? So I had to spend a lot of time getting to know
This is why I asked, because I thought maybe they would bring a Western development team, but then get them very close to, you know, like, sorry. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought, but
We had to, the way I kind of describe it to people is before they let us kind of completely like loose, you had to learn their way of thinking, right? Their way of design approach, very different Japanese design, you know, and how they think and everything. But once that process was kind of like, you know, there was that we built enough confidence, and, you know, that came through iteration and being, I call it training, right? I got trained, right? But then, you know, then it was all like full speed ahead in Cambridge at Ninja Theory. And, you know, like that was insane too, because, I mean, not only was that game, you know, like creatively, like insane. I think someone came out with like the 10 weirdest bosses ever in video game history. And I think like 2 or 3 came from DMC that I worked on, right? Like crazy shit. Again, talk about fever dream ideas, right? Like, and Capcom was awesome because the weirder we were, the more they loved it. Like, yeah, it's great. Go crazy, go creative. And without getting into what the game was about, because, you know, if you like it, you already know. You know, but you got to remember, like, we were getting death threats, Like we got bomb threats at the studio over like changing Dante's hair color, or just the old school fans felt we were changing Dante too much. I mean, there's a guy on the internet that did like a death metal song about how he's going to kill us all, right? Like, it was crazy. Like, well, and
Yeah. You know,
I do look back. That was another incredible like effort by an incredible team at Ninja Theory. And again, I learned a lot there about what it meant to commit creatively and from a production point of view. Because remember, we didn't have a lot of time to make that game. And I'm so proud of that game because, once you took all the hating of like, there was people that never even played the game, but hated it because we changed Dante's hair color. I kid you not. Like when you would ask the journalist, like, what did you play? No, but fuck you guys for changing my favorite character.
What was the general consensus with a hair color change? That you changed his personality and made him to emo? Was that the idea, or?
Oh man, it ranged everywhere. From we made him to emo to we got accused of everything. Like, at one point, because Tamim had dark hair, people claimed that Tamim decided to make Dante him. Totally not true, right? Like,
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like when people don't like something, it's crazy the conspiracy theories that were going around.
Yeah.
One of them was that there was a conspiracy theory that Capcom was trying to get rid of all the fans and bury the IP, like crazy bullcrap. That's not, but it was hard, but I'm proud of it. We made a good game.
Yeah.
There's that classic scene in that old show, The A-Team. I used to watch it when I was a kid. And all my friends loved B.A. Baracus because it's Mr. T, or Murdoch because he was crazy. I was the only one of my friends that my favorite character was Hannibal, the old guy.
Yeah.
With the cigar again.
Yeah.
He'd smoke the cigar and say, I love it when a plan comes together. And, they go on these impossible missions with a ragtag team of crazy, eccentric, talented humans. And then pull it off every episode. Yeah. I kind of like feel that like being a part of those endeavors where you get to be Hannibal and go, I love it when a plan comes together. It's just I'm just thankful for it, but I never take it for granted. I've been in this industry for 30 years now, and being able to look back at these moments and the journey along the way and say, I was there when this happened. Like, depending, and sometimes my contribution might be minimal, but I was there, right?
Yeah.
I was a part of it. I got to see it firsthand. As I got older and, more and more responsibility, I got to be more involved. Like it drives some of these ideas, but just being there and saying I was there, I kind of feel like it's like going to a concert and like the first, like being one of those first people that saw Oasis in some shitty bar in Manchester, and then they become the biggest band in the world, and you're like, yeah, but I was there when, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
See, that should be the name of your autobiography. I was there when ... And then you just list down all the times, right? I mean, that's a pretty good. Yeah.
I love that. I like I said, like I have to keep the stories tame for now. One day when I retire, I will write the memoirs with no holds barred of the crazy shit I've seen.
Yeah.
But like, to be mindful and respectful to the time and the people and all that, like, you gotta hold some things back. What I'll say to you over a beer and some of those stories, but I will tell you, in 30 years, I've seen this industry evolve into a real business, right? Like a real, you got to remember, like at one point games overtook movies, music, and television combined from a revenue generating standpoint, right? That changed the industry. But before that, it was still about a few crazy people with a crazy idea for a fun little game in a warehouse somewhere.
Yeah. Well, this will be my last question, but this kind of leads me to where the industry is at now in the wider space. So we've got a whole bunch of AI slop or AI tools that can code or that can, tap into your C++ database in Unreal and people can vibe code with it. Or you've got synthetic voices, synthetic sound design generation. You've got, Roblox has AI tools that make it easier for kids to make content. You've got Fortnite kind of still finding its feet, but getting to strength to strength. You've got, VR spaces, which haven't fully died. They've started to come back with a much younger audience. So it feels like there's a lot of platforms, there's a lot of activity. Where do you see games kind of going with the various elements kind of brewing out there?
Yeah, like I've thought about this a lot, and I've had a lot of conversations with people. So the AI side of this is really interesting because I kind of feel like all these like ideas and technologies come along, and some of them change the world and some of them don't, right? NFT is a perfect example. There's even a documentary right now on Netflix, The Rise and Fall of NFTs, right?
Yeah.
But AI is not one of those. AI is definitely, to me, we're going to look back one day and say AI changed the world the way the internet changed the world, like that level of difference. But I'll be really honest, like when I first got into mobile, right? And we actually met in the early days of mobile, you and I. There were 3 billion mobile players who weren't mobile players yet. They just didn't know it, right? So there was this whole frontier of like mobile, then free to play was how you monetize, blah, blah. There are no more, in my opinion, there are no more new people to introduce to games. What's cool about mobile was there were 3 billion people with smartphone devices that just didn't know they were gamers yet. We just had to show them they were gamers, right? So it was an untapped market. There's no more untapped market for games.
Yeah.
So it's not about looking at traditional platform models, right? I personally think that the idea of how AI is implemented in a way that makes you feel like you can game anywhere, anytime, on any device, right? On your TV, phone, doesn't matter. It's just one continuous dip in, dip out. In other words, like, we've talked over the years about like augmented reality and virtual reality, but like, I'm not talking about it from like a technology standpoint. I'm talking about this idea that there's interactive game experiences constantly evolving in real time around you, and you can dip in and dip out at any moment, no matter what device you're on, right? And have a continuous experience. And I kind of think that like, because there's no new traditional people to introduce to games, right? Like it's saturated. Then you have to figure out how to reach those, whatever it's at now, 4 billion gamers in the world, something like that. You have to figure out how to change their lives.
Thanks so much for listening. You've been listening to Playlist, and this is a podcast produced by the 3000s with intro music by Sam Shepard and also produced by myself, Benjamin Dorr. If you would like updates on the show, you can follow us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with links in the show notes below. And if you would like more content, please remember to give us a follow or a subscribe on your chosen platform. We'll see you next time.